Let's start over here with a live person asking a question.
Do you ever find in your professional practice any struggles with kind of the black and whiteness of the ethical considerations when you're trying to develop rapport with families that are from different cultures? Like, for example, like accepting tea.
What I'd first like to say is behavior analysts are committed to functionalism and contextualism. And so when we do our work at its essence, whatever we do, we want to be functional. When we do our work as behavior analysts at its essence, we want to always be deeply contextual. That's what a behavior analyst does when they're truly living the epistemology of behavior analysis and the behavioral theory. And so, if you go into a home and you don't take off your shoes, you keep them on, and you then make the family uncomfortable, and they don't ask you back, were you being functional in terms of developing a relationship and having an opportunity to support them? What do you think?
No.
So if you go into a home with a family that has a cultural ritual of offering tea and dates, because they're Egyptian, and their family, their culture is maybe 6,000 years old, and this is what they've been doing for 6,000 years. It's a ritual that they do. It isn't a quid pro quo. They're not trying to get anything from you by offering the tea and dates. They're simply doing something that Egyptian families have done for thousands and thousands of years when a guest comes to your home and you are put into the category of guest. So when you reject the tea and you reject the date and they don't call you back and they don't get your service, are you being functional?
No.
What's the answer?
No.
No. Are you being deeply contextual? And so whenever I work with a family, I remember that I am a behavior analyst, and I want to do the best job I can as a behavioral analyst committed to the laws of behavior, which are profound and deep and rich and tremendously insightful into any moment to understand what's happening and how to behave appropriately. That's the foundation of my ethical behavior.
Do you find that balance quite easy for you now at this point, or
Pardon?
is it still? Do you find that balance to be something that's quite easy for you now, or is it still a bit of a struggle?
I have no struggle with it. My point is, also because I teach the course on ethics, and because, as you know already, I'm a nerd, I'm really interested in the whole philosophy of ethics. Now, does anyone believe that the thought of ethics began with one book written in 2006 for behavior analysts? No. Actually, the thinking of ethics goes back to China with Confucius, 5,000 or 6,000 years. It goes back to Western culture, to Aristotle and Socrates, 2,000 or 3,000 years. And there have been many ethical philosophies developed along the way, including the ethics of virtue, that's Aristotle. The ethics of consequences, that's called theological ethics. That comes from Mills, from England, in the 17th century. There's the ethics of rules, that comes from Kant. And most recently, and those were all men. Men were defining ethics for thousands and thousands of years. But fortunately, in the 20th century, women philosophers have been beginning to have a voice too. And interestingly enough, they have developed another ethical philosophy called the ethics of caring, about the centrality of relationships and not causing harm to relationships. Because the foundation of all this work, which Mariko and Noreen and others have brought to your attention, is it all begins with the relationship.
Yeah.
And what we know from clinical psychology and counseling psychology is 40 to 60% of the variance in any parent training effort, no matter what methodology you use, and most of us use social learning theory as our methodology, whether you're a psychologist or whether you're a behavior analyst, the relationship is central to the possibility of having any influence that's good and lasting for that child and family. And so those are the ethical principles that I stand on. And I think that we as behavior analysts are in the process of learning. And I think we will continue to grow and deepen our ethical understanding as we go on to think about it. And it already has happened because, for example, in the second edition of the Ethics for Behavior Analysts book, there's a chapter called The Foundational Principles. It includes do no harm, provide benefit, be fair, and be kind and caring. So I have no doubt that we are growing as behavior analysts in our understanding of ethics, and to think that not accepting tea and dates from an Egyptian family, from an ancient, wise culture, somehow goes against our ethical principles, I'm not sure that's the case. So that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Having drunk many cups of Egyptian tea and eaten many dates in my day, I can tell you that a family would be, their response would be, have we offended you? Are you not, is this not a friendly relationship? Do you think my food is not delicious or clean or whatever? You'd actually be lucky to get away with just tea and dates. So there is some negotiating to do on the not the full meal for a meeting. But anyway.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry for going on. I'm too close to this because my wife is from Japan, so I am dealing with cultural issues every day, and I love every minute of it, and I have for 24 years. But the other thing I want to say is I worked with a Taiwanese family, a different Taiwanese family, and she always served tea, and I always drank the tea. I confess, you can report that. And I asked her toward the end of her work, she did brilliant work with her daughter. I have video of that too. We're not going to see that today. But I asked her, if I came to your home and you made that tea for me and I didn't accept it, what would you think about working with me? And she's very articulate. This is a brilliant mother, very articulate. And she said, well, this is what I would think. I made you tea. This is some of the finest tea in Taiwan. I bought it special. I wanted to give you the best of Taiwanese tea. If you know anything about Taiwanese tea, it's really sweet and wonderful, just naturally sweet. And you didn't accept my tea. How am I going to accept your science-based parenting, which is completely alien to my culture, when you won't even accept a cup of tea from me? It's not going to happen. And then she added, there is someone coming to my house. They're not accepting my tea. We have a very, very superficial relationship. She comes, she does what she does, she goes.
One of the stories I've told Joe before, which he and I have enjoyed, was years ago when I worked for the Autism Society. I got a phone call from a parent, and she said, I've decided to fire this behavior consultant. This is probably about 20 years ago now. And she said, he just, he doesn't know what he's doing. There's no improvement. He really isn't worth vacuuming for. I thought that was the most damning statement a woman could make. Not worth vacuuming for. Mariko, can you speak on what special needs approaches look like in Japan? Is there a similar PBS system there as that we have here?
No.
Yeah.
I started traveling to Japan about 3 years ago because as I visited, I noticed that they're really society in the whole has very little understanding of people with disabilities. It's still very segregated, and I think one of my mind-blowing moments was this probably about 10 years ago. I had it on my EPSI 590 presentation when I was finishing my master's at UBC, and it was a poster that was on a train that had a child with Down syndrome. It was black and white, looked very morbid and sad, and he was sitting there like this with a train, and on the top it says, I'm a human too. Please, it's something along the lines, I'm human too, I have wants and needs, or something like that. And I thought, this is modern Japan, and this is how people with disabilities are portrayed. So this is why I started working in Japan about 3 years ago. First of all, there's not a lot of BCBAs. In Japan, I think there's less than 10. So the amount of services that they are able to provide are quite limited. So there's no government type of funding available either. They have kind of almost like if you have a diagnosis of a disability, you have I don't know, we don't have an equivalent of it, but there's a passport that you can use that you can kind of get access to certain services, but those services aren't necessarily therapeutic in nature per se. They might be after-school care services, bus services, stuff like that. And for you to access that, all you need is that passport, and for an organization to deem itself that these people can come to that it's just how big is your organized, like how square footage wise, how big is it? How many staff do you have in relation to children? And they're not really looking at necessarily the quality. So I'm not saying that there aren't quality services available, there aren't, but it's very, very limited.
So one of the questions here is, as panelists, and you can each answer this, what is your experience being bridging culturally sensitive PBS in school and families? Like, what role can, I think my interpretation of this is, what role can external professionals play in helping bridge the gap, perhaps in communication with schools?
If we, in fact, work toward being culturally responsive practitioners, and we learn about a family's culture, both in general but also uniquely to that family, and knowing that there'll be a multicultural view as they live more and more years in Canada and adapt Canadian values, we can help, and I use the word translation loosely here, we can be a liaison between their culture and the school. We can help them understand certain things a child's doing at school that are culturally informed and not truly a problem behavior. I'll give you an example. In fact, in Deborah Chin's chapter, she has stories, she has vignettes. And one of the vignettes is about a boy of Mexican heritage living in California. And at school, whenever the teacher talks, he goes like this. And whenever the teacher asks him to do things, he goes like this. And the teacher is interpreting this as disrespectful and non-compliant. But what the behavior consultant knew, because they were very close to the Mexican culture, is that actually that child was showing respect to the teacher. And we have someone here who is from Mexico, and I can see them nodding their head, knowing this quite well. And so that really helped. The teacher then knew actually the child was being very respectful in a very culturally appropriate way for a Mexican boy. And that really helped. That helped cut through some misunderstandings. And that's, I think, one role that we as behavior analysts who are learning to be culturally responsive can serve as a mediator of that knowledge and those interpretations for teachers in school. Because let's remember, teachers are in that classroom for 6 hours a day for 195 days a year. And they also work on the weekend, and they stay late just getting all their paperwork done. Teachers are very busy, and they have a profoundly important job. We can help them as behavior analysts in this respect if they don't have the time or if they're not part of that culture by giving them this important cultural information.